I just want to welcome you back. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Jeff Olivet, the Executive Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Jeff has worked to prevent and end homelessness for more than 25 years as a street outreach worker, case manager, coalition builder, researcher, and trainer. He is the founder of Joe Consulting, co-founder of the Racial Equity Partners, and from 2010 to 2018, he has served as CEO of C4 Innovations. Throughout his career, he has worked extensively in the areas of homelessness and housing, health and behavioral health, HIV, education, and organizational development. Jeff has been principal investigator on multiple research studies funded by private foundations and the National Institutes of Health. He is deeply committed to social justice, racial equity, gender equality, and inclusion for all. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Alabama and a master's degree from Boston College. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Jeff Olivet.
It is great to be with you all today. Thank you so much for the incredible hospitality this week. My colleague Tamara and I have been here since Tuesday, and we have broken bread with many of you all. We've been out on outreach with some of you. We've spent time in conference rooms and beer gardens and rooms like this, and it's been fantastic. And we're just deeply grateful for the welcome that you all have shown us. Bob Urey earlier kind of asked who was here in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina. I was here in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina. I worked some with Francis Isbell. I worked with my now federal colleague, Anthony Love, who used to run this coalition. Amen. I'll tell him we got that when I invoked his name. I was part of a group that was doing Hurricane Katrina response all over the Southeast. And in that time, it was 150,000 people coming from New Orleans here. The healthcare for the homeless teams, Marion Scott, who was at Harris County Hospital District at the time, the healthcare for the homeless folks were driving mobile health units onto the floor of the Astrodome to provide healthcare for people who had been displaced by Katrina. We had a lot to learn about how to respond to disaster. And you all have done an incredible job building that muscle over the last 17 plus years. And it is so apparent to me over the last couple of days what incredible impact you all are making on folks experiencing homelessness here in Houston, Harris County, and the surrounding counties. I was really struck by a conversation I had. We had the honor to be out with the encampment team. We should give them a very strong round of applause. On Tuesday afternoon, we were out with the encampment team under a bridge. I have no idea which bridge it was or where in Houston we were, but the conversation that I had with a woman there who told me she became homeless last fall. She had been in an apartment for the last 9 years in a relationship with her partner, her common law husband, and he died in October. She was not on the lease and she didn't have the money to maintain the apartment, and she became homeless. She ended up in the encampment because she had a friend there and she deemed that was the safest of all of her not so great options. She's now getting connected to housing and finding a way forward. When I was listening to her talk, it struck me that she hadn't failed. We had failed her. We had somehow not been able to create a safety net to keep that woman and her crazy little dog from becoming homeless. We failed her. We also had a chance to be at the Beacon Center and kind of be involved with intake into the coordinated entry system. And I met a young man who, when asked how long he had been homeless, he paused for a minute and said, "I've been homeless my whole life." He'd been through foster care. He had some mental health issues he talked about. He was now staying in vehicles, had no place to be. getting connected for the first time with housing opportunities. How long have you been homeless? My whole life. He hadn't failed. We had failed him. And every one of the systems that he has touched, the education system, the foster care system, the healthcare system, the behavioral healthcare system, we hadn't gotten our act together enough to make sure that that young man never experienced homelessness. Homelessness is not an individual failure. Homelessness is a systems failure. And if we're going to solve homelessness, we've got to fix the systems that are creating homelessness in the first place. We've actually gotten very good at ending homelessness on an individual level. You all do it every day. You've housed 8,100 people in the last year and a half. That's extraordinary. And yet we still have homelessness because we've never solved the systemic issues, the root causes, the lack of support, the lack of housing affordability, the systemic racism that drives high rates of homelessness for communities of color. If we're going to end homelessness, we've got to think of it systemically. You still do the individual work. That's where somebody gets into an apartment. That's where somebody accesses health and behavioral health services and a job and trauma-informed supports. But unless we're going upstream and turning off the faucets, unless we are solving it at a systemic level, we're going to have homelessness with us for a very long time. Councilwoman Thomas talked about the exhaustion that we see among frontline providers in particular, but I think it's everybody who's working on homelessness over the last couple of years. I know many of you have been involved with this work for a long time. I first got involved in homelessness work in 1994. I'm entering my 28th year in this work. I have been accused by some of being a failure because we still have homelessness. It's sort of like saying housing first causes homelessness, because look, we've been at it for a while and we still have homelessness. It's sort of a misdiagnosis of what's going on. But this work is hard. This work was hard when Hurricanes Katrina and Rita hit. This work was hard before the COVID pandemic hit. It's hard now. And those of you who are doing outreach and case management and mental health and substance use work, and those of you who are operating at the systems level, you're doing this in the context of the biggest economic and public health upheaval we've seen in generations. This pandemic has impacted all of us. I'm sure there are people in this room who have lost loved ones, and you weren't able to go to a funeral during the height of the pandemic. You weren't able to celebrate a child's graduation or a family wedding. We've all experienced tremendous loss. Many people who are homeless tonight in Harris County are homeless because of the pandemic. Some are still homeless because of Hurricane Harvey. These things have long-lasting impact. So I want to acknowledge the exhaustion. I'm going to have to leave here pretty quickly after I finish in a few minutes to go to the airport. When I get on the airplane, they're going to come on the PA. First, they're going to say there's no mask mandate anymore, and some people are going to cheer and some people are going to freak out. But then they're going to say, in the case of an emergency, an oxygen mask will drop from the ceiling. Be sure to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. I think it's critical in the work that you all do every day to remember to put on your own oxygen mask. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Councilwoman Thomas said this is a marathon with a bunch of little sprints in it. It's a good metaphor. I'm going to take issue. She's not in the room, so you can tell her I took issue with her. I used to think of homelessness work as a marathon. Then I started thinking of it as a sprint. Oh, maybe the other way around. I thought it was a sprint in the early 90s. We're going to work ourselves out of a job. Then maybe, it's still here with us. It's a marathon. I have come to believe it's a relay race. And with generations of people who have founded some of these organizations moving on, we're seeing this at the national level with retirements of key allies in this fight, people who have passed the baton to younger generations of people. As I've met the coalition staff over the last couple of days and seen just the incredible talent that the young people on staff bring, you're the next generation in this work. And as some of the folks who have been at this for 25 and 28 and 35 years are beginning to pass the baton, it's yours to take up. I wish it wasn't a relay race, but it is. That is clear to me. What is clear to me also is just the extraordinary work you all have done. You've heard the numbers today, a 64% reduction in homelessness since 2011. 2/3. You've slashed homelessness in this area by 2/3 in a decade. That is extraordinary. And we don't see that in every community. We see some communities doing pretty well. Washington, D.C., my adopted hometown, is actually doing pretty well also. I think they're moving in the right direction on a lot of things. Some of our cities on the West Coast are really struggling. In Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and others, homelessness is on the increase. Cost of housing is through the roof. There are so many other breakdowns in the system that are causing that. You've defied the trends in a lot of ways, along with Milwaukee, along with Washington, D.C., along with a few others. And I've been trying to rack my brain over the last couple or 3 days about what it is you all are doing. I needed to come see it with my own eyes. I needed to come talk with you all and not just hear it from Tamara and our team. When they say Houston's great, we're not sure if it's replicable. I have heard that. I'm trying to figure out how it's replicable. I read the article in the LA Times also saying what Los Angeles might have to learn from Houston. And the night before I came here, I was sitting in a restaurant in DC with a delegation from Los Angeles County and told them about that piece, Mike, and have emailed that to them. And so I've been trying to understand what it is you all are doing to achieve that 64% reduction, to achieve that 8,100 people housed under the CHIP program. And I've got to believe that it's no accident. I think you've built something here, and you've built something really extraordinary. If you'll indulge me, I'm gonna give a sports metaphor. I've had staff over the years who don't like my sports metaphors, but I don't care. I could go with baseball. I have spent many years in Boston, and I'm a Red Sox fan, but I've got a healthy fear of the Astros these days. I'm also a Nats season ticket holder for the last few years, and I've still got a healthy fear of the Astros these days. So I'm not gonna give a baseball metaphor. I'm going to give a football metaphor because I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and we don't have a lot to hang on to in Alabama. So we do have Alabama football. And when I was in college there, Gene Stallings had come from Texas to be our football coach. He went to my church also. I sat in front of him every Sunday at church, and then I'd go to the games. We had a really good football team. We won a national championship when I was a senior in college in 1991. We were at the Superdome in New Orleans, just beating the crap out of Miami. It was fantastic. And then we were horrible for about 15 years after that. Coach Stallings retired. We struggled. We couldn't get back to that glory. Then we went and stole Nick Saban, and he built a machine. And Alabama's won about half of the national championships in the last 13 or 14 years. It is no accident. They built a machine around it. They get great talent. They might have a year where they don't do so well, but they're always right up there. But what they have built is a bar of excellence that is here. And the DNA, deeply rooted DNA of how you keep being successful, even when players graduate, even when assistant coaches move on. The parallel I want to make with you all is you've built that muscle. And I don't think it started in 2011. The success we see started in 2011. I think you were building those muscles well before that. When I hear about the durability of this coalition, and I know it's been through ups and downs, but since 1983, when I see the commitment of the faith community here, the business community here, the city and county aligned, who does that? I mean, who does that? Where that many constituencies, the nonprofit community, the business community, city and county, are focused on the shared goal, not focused on the finger pointing, not focused on what you're supposed to be doing that you're not. I could name drop Melody, who's been, I feel like I should have a bingo card every time somebody says Melody today. We need to reproduce the kind of alignment you all have around the country. Let me just say a quick word about what we're doing at the federal level. I stepped into this role running the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness about 8 weeks ago, and our team had already done extraordinary work on building the groundwork for a new federal strategic plan, which we'll be releasing later this year. The team held almost 100 listening sessions with people from all over the country, many of whom had experienced homelessness themselves. In that federal strategic plan, you are going to see a laser-like focus on racial equity, LGBTQ equity, gender equality, and protections for people with disabilities. I believe that it is no accident that people of color are overrepresented in the homeless population. For all of your successes here in Houston, your homeless population includes Black folks at a rate of 3 to 1 compared to the general population of Harris County. That is not okay. It's not an accident. It's not going to solve itself by accident. You got to bring a real racial equity focus to your work. We're also deeply committed to data and evidence. We are going to promote activities and best practices that are grounded in evidence, that are grounded in data. We're going to push the federal government to do a better job at cross-sector and cross-departmental data sharing. We're going to try to get beyond using only the PIT count and HMIS as our primary drivers of homelessness data around the country. And we're going to also put in place a national research agenda that builds the evidence base over time for what works. We are also going to go upstream and focus on prevention before homelessness ever happens. And I don't mean at the moment of eviction. I don't mean diversion at the moment somebody calls the coordinated entry system. I mean 6 months or a year or 5 years before that, where we're using the health system and the education system, the criminal justice system and the foster care system to determine who's most at risk of becoming homeless and intervene much earlier so that no young person ever exits foster care into homelessness, so that no one ever is discharged from a jail or a prison and ends up on the street or in the shelter. If we could turn off those two faucets at foster care transition and criminal justice reentry, we are also doing the work of racial justice because those two systems disproportionately target people of color. You've got to turn off the faucet. We're also going to focus on the crisis response. I am so impressed at the work you all are doing around encampments here. It is thoughtful, it's focused, it's time-bound, and it's tied to housing and services. It may not be perfect. It probably has a long way to go. Just because you clear one encampment doesn't mean another one may not pop up somewhere else. But the fact that you've effectively decommissioned more than 50 encampments in this community and connected people to housing and services is extraordinary. Keep up that work, finish it off. The focus on unsheltered homelessness has to be central to our homelessness response. We are also doubling down on housing first. The focus on housing and wraparound supports has to be the ultimate solution to homelessness. Housing is the basic foundation from which people can make all sorts of other good things happen, where you can attend to your health and behavioral health needs, where you can get a job and keep a job, where you can parent your children, where you can reconnect with friends and family and reintegrate in the community. Housing is the foundation. But housing first does not mean housing only. And you all know this. I think you've already been doing it. We've got to shore up the connections with the behavioral health system. We've got to shore up connections with the workforce development system and employers. We've got to shore up supports for families and youth and elderly folks. It is horrifying that people over 60 are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. If we're failing our elders, what are we doing as a society? We've got to make sure that not only are we putting a roof over people's heads, but that we're wrapping a lot of services and support around them. So that's a preview of what's to come in the federal strategic plan, which you'll see later this summer. We're going to need you to implement. We can't implement at the federal level. We can set policy, we can shape directions, we can try to align the 19 federal agencies who are members of our council at the USICH. 19 federal agencies with 41 different funding streams supporting homeless programs. Our job is to align all of those and point it at the same direction. Your job is to implement it on the ground. Keep doing the work that you're doing. Many of you have had a chance to meet my colleague, Tamara Wright. She's our regional coordinator who oversees all of our work in Texas. If you don't know her already, get to know her. Let her be your point of contact. If you have any questions about what we're doing, she's a great contact for you. As we roll out the federal strategic plan, she's going to be a champion of that across Texas and a support for you in that work. We've celebrated a lot today. We've talked about the 64% reduction. I'll go back to Alabama football for a minute. There was a wide receiver when I was in college named Prince Wembley. He was never that great, but he would celebrate to high heaven every time he'd get a first down. Well, not even a touchdown. He'd catch a 12-yard pass and act like it was the end of the world. It was great, but we're not there yet. You know, it's good to celebrate. It's good to acknowledge the progress, But the reality is more than 3,000 of our brothers and sisters are still homeless in this community tonight. We are far from being done. And as much great work as you all have done over the last 11 years, 15, 20 years, the hard work lies ahead. And that's hard. It's hard when you're exhausted to hear that and to know that. You got to finish the work. You've got to double down on what's working. You've got to continue to bust through the barriers that are getting in your way. I hope you'll let us know how we can do that at the federal level. And you gotta keep going until this is done. You are so close. You are so close to being able to say, you remember that time when we had homelessness in Houston? Remember those days? I hope 3 or 4 years from now, you're talking about homelessness in past tense, not in present tense. I was an outreach worker many years ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my Healthcare for the Homeless program there had a really strong art component. We had art therapists with us on outreach doing art with kids in motels up and down Route 66. We had people doing art in our waiting room and in the art studio attached to our clinic. On the wall of my office today, I have a painting by a 5-year-old. It's this house. It's a good 5-year-old house, except it's got these sort of loops on the side of it. They kind of look like ears. And I said to him, Scotty, tell me about your painting. I learned that from art therapists, by the way. So tell me, what is that? He goes, it's a house with handles. It's a 5-year-old whose mom had fled domestic violence. When I met her, she had a fractured skull with black eyes like this. Her 10-year-old son was not only parenting his 5-year-old brother, but also looking out for his mom in the shelter. And Scotty painted this picture and he said, it's a house with handles so I can take it with us wherever we go. That painting grounds everything I do these days. And your work, the successes you see every day, the smile of someone who came into the dental clinic with front teeth missing and comes out with this gregarious smile. These stories ground us. These human relationships we have with one another drive us. And together, we can recommit to this work. We can double down on this work. We can keep doing what's working. We can lift each other up when we're feeling exhausted. And we can keep going until the work of homelessness is a thing of the past. Thank you so much for letting us be here today and for this week. You all have been incredible this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So right now we are going to open the floor for questions and answers. My colleague Katina will be on that side of the room. I will be on this side, so that way we'll be able to pass the microphone. You are able to share your name and affiliation, but still please keep it a little brief, so that way we can get through all of the questions and answers.
Hi, my name is Nakia Sims. So I'm on the local Houston COC steering committee as a person with lived expertise. So appreciative of the people that advocated to have people with lived expertise as well as your listening sessions. So my question stems from watching your Spark with Mark way back when. One of the things that you touched upon with the 6 steps was about the kind of the intersectionality of homelessness. And then when we talk about child welfare systems, and as an African-American woman with $122,000 in student loans, earning under living wages, part of those systemic racist barriers that one must face, what's the not being reactive, but being proactive when you talk about women, especially African-Americans who these touch systems, it's a different reaction. So I guess my question is, so that African-American women specifically, our children don't have to be in foster care system. Our children don't have to be in the criminal justice system. What are some things federally that can be done, including voices of women like me with children, you know, to avoid the systemic racism and the cycle of homelessness and housing instability?
Thank you for the question, Nakia. And also thank you for the incredible work you all do to guide this system. I had a good conversation with Gregory yesterday. People who have been closest to these problems, people who've experienced homelessness themselves, have to be equal partners in this work. It can't be white executive directors and board members deciding on behalf of people of color experiencing homelessness. We've got to be in real power sharing and real solidarity in this work. So thank you for all of that. Around your question, you asked a big question, which is a real fundamental rethinking as a society about how we come to some sense of racial justice. The Spark project that Nakia talked about is a project that I was part of a number of years ago called Supporting Partnerships for Anti-Racist Communities. And we looked across the nation at the intersection of structural racism and homelessness. And through quantitative analysis of 161 individuals who'd gone through homelessness systems and 200 oral histories with people of color experiencing homelessness, we learned a lot. And one of the things we learned is that many people of color, and in particular young Black moms, if I can be just very direct about that, have so little economic buffer that if anything bad goes wrong, a car repair, a child gets sick and you can't go to work, anything, not only do you not have $300 for that car repair, nobody in your network does either. We started talking about this as network impoverishment, that a whole network of people has been kept out of the economic opportunities this country has had to offer. If you start tracing back the historical roots of that, you can tie it to redlining, you can tie it to a lot of other policies, but you know, my ancestors, my grandparents were able to buy into the housing market. They weren't rich, but they were, my grandfather was a truck driver in Birmingham. They didn't have a lot of money, but they were able to buy into the housing market in the 30s and 40s when it was cheap, when there was a lot of government subsidy for it through Works Progress Administration and FDR New Deal programs, and then through GI Bill. Black people, Latino people, Native American people, Asian people were kept out of that possibility. Now, let somebody buy into the housing market in 1930, 1938 for $10,000, see what that home's worth now, pass that generational wealth on 2 or 3 times, and that white kid is less likely to come out with student loans, more likely to have an uncle they can call on if things go wrong, more likely to have equity in a home that they can draw on during a time of crisis. It is no accident. These are not individual decisions that people of color are making. This is generational wealth gap that has been developed over time. Now, your question, you told folks to be brief with their questions. You didn't tell me to be brief with my answers. I can't be out. Let me wrap this up.
Have a few more minutes to answer. I meant to mention that we may have some people streaming who may have questions coming through.
Okay, great. Let me answer quickly Nakia's question about the federal response. I am really impressed with Secretary Fudge at HUD right now. She's the chair of our council, so she's essentially my board chair these days. She's announced 2 things in recent days. One, around examining all of HUD's policy around criminal backgrounds being a barrier to housing. That's a good step. The other is that the White House and HUD have launched into a serious discussion about the racial gap in mortgages and appraisals. So these are sort of big picture policies that can happen. What we're doing in our federal plan is embedding racial equity as a principle, a pillar, and a set of actions and strategies that cut across the rest of the plan. Thank you for the question.
I have one specifically about the HUD's definition on chronic homelessness. And I know many of us here know that there are really 2 ways to meet that definition, one of which is very straightforward, being homeless continuously for a year. And the other one is like infamously difficult to prove, which is 4 instances totaling 12 months over the past 3 years, and specifically how it impacts people who have gone to prison for more than 90 days, and how that'll create a gap in that. Is HUD realizing that that may need to be redefined, or whether the prison time counts as a gap or not, or whether those 4 instances, totaling 12 months over the past 3 years, is actually effective and useful in this?
It's a big question. It's a really good question. The whole table over there is high-fiving each other now. So I do not speak for HUD, let me say that. We are an independent agency that works across the federal government with the White House, with HUD, and with others to try to align policy. What I can tell you is we are in conversations with HUD about that very thing. The first federal strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness came out in 2010. It was called Opening Doors. And what it did was really focus subpopulation by subpopulation. Let's go strong at chronic homelessness. Let's go strong at veteran homelessness. And then we can really start looking at youth and families. And I think at the time that was a really useful frame. I even look at the work you all have done in Houston. One thing I've heard the last couple of days is that the work you all did on veterans was an extraordinary launch pad. It was a way of galvanizing public will, showing a proof of concept. Tamara was here when Houston essentially, effectively ended veteran homelessness. We know that some veterans still become homeless, but you all achieved a kind of functional zero. So that was useful. I think at this point, we need to rethink that subpopulation by subpopulation framework. The categories don't hold up. If you look at what is a family, if you see a single woman on the street or in the shelter, but her kids are with grandma, is she a family? Is she a single? If somebody's a veteran but doesn't have an honorable discharge, what do they qualify for? SSVF, but not this. I know VASH has expanded its eligibility. The categories are weird, right? The chronic homeless definition may be the weirdest of all. It feels arbitrary. Why are you more vulnerable at 12 and a half months than you were at 11 and a half months, or after 4 episodes of homelessness and not 3? So we are engaged in conversation with HUD and with other departments to kind of rethink and reframe all of this. I told you I've been on the job 8 weeks, so that's as far as we've gotten so far.
Okay. We may have like 1 minute for one more question. Okay.
You probably don't need the mic. Yeah.
There are people online though. Maybe, yeah, let's use the mic just so people online might hear.
So along with that chronic definition, is there thought or are there partners included to add to the narrative related to domestic violence? Because it gets carved out of that definition.
Right. The question was about domestic violence in the mix on this, how around chronic, but I think generally the domestic violence question is a big one. And we're certainly in very good conversation with folks at Department of Justice, as well as HUD, on how do we both recognize and continue to respond better to domestic violence. So that's kind of a broad answer to your very specific question, but certainly we're keenly aware of the dramatic overlap between family homelessness and domestic violence. At the local level, I was impressed, Barbie, that you are on this panel, first of all, and that you're as involved as you are in the work of the coalition. That's not true in every community. Sometimes there's a real divide between the domestic violence response system and the homelessness response system. So at the federal level, what we're trying to do is make sure we're connecting all the dots, which is our mandate as an agency. At the local level, I hope you'll keep doing exactly what you're doing, of bridging. Not everyone who experiences domestic violence becomes homeless. It's often very economically driven. Not everyone who's homeless has experienced domestic violence, but there's a ton of overlap. It's this kind of Venn diagram with a whole bunch in the middle. Keep holding that Venn diagram together in your response.
I have a question from online. Laura Cantor of the Montrose Center asks, we seem to be stuck on how we make sure we identify and address the unique needs of LGBT plus people. What is the best practice in this regard, and what do you recommend we do?
So yeah, I mentioned earlier our pillar on equity. There's a very strong focus on LGBTQ populations. I think there are a number of factors that go into this. One, so many young people who become homeless identify as LGBTQ. Let's make sure they're getting the support they need. Many have been rejected by friends and family and faith communities and are really on their own and are at incredible risk on the street, risk of violence, risk of exploitation. So to Laura's question, I think really shoring up our youth homelessness response. I know you all are a recent YHDP grantee, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project. Congratulations on that. It's a fantastic program. You're entering into a brave new world there. Around trans people, let's create shelters where they're safe, where people who identify as non-binary or who identify at different places on the gender identity spectrum have a place to be, where they've got safe bathrooms and showers, where they've got choice in what kind of a room they stay in and aren't told where to go based on their assigned gender at birth. You know, let's get a little 21st century about our response to transgender issues. Is that okay to say in Texas? I don't know if that's
Yes.
but and then on the housing discrimination side, I think LGBTQ people still face tremendous discrimination around fair housing, and we need to do a better job at the federal level, making sure that HUD's Fair Housing Office is tied into our homelessness response. And at the local level, you need to make sure that you're getting connected with your fair housing offices and advocates to jump quickly on discrimination, not just against LGBTQ people, but against all protected classes. Let's connect the dots between fair housing and homelessness.
Awesome. Did we have any more questions online? Okay.
It's more of a challenging question. Mr. Olivet, again, it's a pleasure, and to all the individuals here and the great leaders and CEOs and people that are so committed to the purpose of helping those of us such as myself. Excuse me for sitting down. I got a bad back and everything. But my question to you is, and I'm going to speak this into existence, the next time that you'll be here, I would challenge each of you and every one of you to do a town hall, and each person here that is here today has to bring a lived experience person with them.
Gregory, thank
Wow.
you. Challenge not only accepted, but embraced. Let's do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's great to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. We have had a pleasure hearing from Jeff Olivet. We appreciate you for being here with us, Jeff. We cannot thank you enough, and for answering the questions and everything. So yes. Really quickly, I would just like to acknowledge Council Member Sally Alcon and Council Member Amy Peck, who are steadfast advocates for our system, housing, and solving homelessness. So major thank you, Council members. Thank you. And here we go. So no, I know this is not quite on the agenda. Coalition, don't freak out, we're okay. But I noticed that there were a few people